My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 31, and this is the story of how I learned that silence can look like consent, until you decide it doesn't. If you enjoy real-life stories like mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. I rent my hands out to details. That's what my grandmother used to say. I wasn't the loud kid, or the charming one, or the one who drew a room into orbit. I was the steady one. The kid who learned how to re-caulk a tub by watching a 5-minute video on my phone, who kept a notepad in her back pocket and wrote down the measurements no one else bothered to remember. Even now, as I'm saying this, I can picture the page where I wrote the width of my living room windows in careful block numbers, 3534. I still have that notepad in a kitchen drawer. When things get loud around me, I open it just to remind myself that details don't lie. I grew up in a small split-level ranch in Gresham, outside Portland. We weren't poor, but our house always felt like it was waiting for permission to feel comfortable. My mom, Karen, kept the carpets vacuumed in straight lines that made little highways to nowhere, and my dad, Thomas, bought big-box store tools he never unwrapped. My older brother Ryan was the cyclone in our weather map. People noticed him. Coaches praised him. Teachers liked him even when he forgot his homework. Neighbors smiled when he cut through their yards. He had a talent for turning consequences into stories. When he was 10 and shattered a basement window with a baseball, he told Dad it was a lucky hit, like it proved he had reach. Dad laughed, slapped him on the shoulder, and called him slugger for a month. When I was 10 and splashed a ring of paint on the garage floor while trying to give a cracked chair a second chance, Dad frowned for a week and said I needed to be more careful. That was the rhythm no one admitted out loud. Ryan's messes became evidence of potential. My work became evidence that I didn't need anything. The first time I realized I could build something that wasn't going to be taken away, I was 25 and tired of waiting for life to start. I'd been working as an assistant project coordinator at a commercial landscaping company, scheduling crews, ordering materials, making sure the right shrubs went into the right soil. I liked the math of it. I liked that Japanese maples didn't argue with you about their root balls. I liked that a shovel did what it promised. The house found me more than I found it. I wasn't even looking. A coworker mentioned his aunt had passed away and left behind a bungalow in Selwood that needed a lot of love. He said the buyers kept backing out because the inspection report read like a cautionary tale. Old electrical, a roof that sighed when it rained, windows with the kind of metal casements that stick in your bones when you try to lift them. The price was low. Lower than it should have been. Lower than the neighborhood. He said it with the careful tone of someone telling you where a thin piece of ice might hold your weight. I drove by after work. The house sat on a narrow lot with a cherry tree that had decided the fence was optional. The paint was the color of tired oatmeal, but the porch beam had a carved notch where 2 grains of wood met, and the front steps had the sweetness of a tilt that said, "If you come in, I'll try." I stood on the sidewalk with my hands in my jacket and felt more awake than I had in months. I put in an offer with trembling fingers. I wrote a letter. I told the seller I wasn't going to flip it. I told them I would learn the house before I changed it. I promised the cherry tree could keep leaning. When I called my parents to tell them, my mom said, "You don't need to play hero, Nat." And my dad said, "Those old houses are money pits. Why don't you wait until you meet someone?" Ryan, on speakerphone from wherever he was always slightly late from, laughed and said, "Make sure the roof doesn't cave in on your Pinterest dreams." I bought it anyway. It's strange what changes and what doesn't. The first night on the floor of my living room, with the heat coming up unevenly and every board complaining like a chorus, I felt a kind of quiet that wasn't emptiness. It had weight. It had promise. I put my palms on the hardwood, like I could memorize the shape of the room, and thought, if I do this right, the house will remember me. The work was not pretty. It never is. There's nothing cinematic about scraping off 100 years of paint in a hallway where the light bulb hums like an anxious insect. There's nothing moving about standing in the plumbing aisle at 8 p.m., comparing 2 nearly identical flanges with hands that still smell like mildew. It was repetitive and tiring and constant, and for the first time in my life, mine, I could tell you about the weekend I learned to float joint compound so smoothly that the patched seams in the dining room disappeared like a good apology. I could tell you about the afternoon I pulled out the old rug in the bedroom and found fur floors underneath, Scarred but beautiful in the way your grandmother's knuckles are beautiful when she kneads dough. I could tell you about the night I cried because the sash rope disintegrated in my hands, and I thought I'd broken something I couldn't fix. Then I watched a video, bought new cord, and 2 hours later, pulled the window open and felt the weight balance like breath. If you were to ask me when the house began to feel like a home, I could give you the exact answer. It was a Tuesday in late October, rain in the forecast. The air clear in that way Portland air gets when the city is rinsed. I had just installed the last piece of trim around the archway between the living room and the hall. Nothing dramatic happened. The nail set made a tiny sound. The paintbrush made a longer one. I stepped back and the room felt finished. Not perfect. Not magazine ready, just honest. I made a grilled cheese on my little stove, sat cross-legged on the floor, and ate it over a paper towel like a teenager. I texted a photo to my friend Leah with the caption, "We did a thing." She texted back 3 heart emojis and, "You did a thing." I slept like a log. Here's where things got complicated. Ryan drifted like he always had. Jobs that looked good on paper and then ended without clean edges. He could sell you hope and then not show up for the shift. He was charming, and charm is a skill people pretend isn't. He started dating a woman named Lauren who was bowling lane bright, blonde ponytail, high laugh, a way of looking at you like she'd already made a decision. She worked in marketing for an athletic wear brand and had a way of saying your name that made you want to step forward. The first time I met her was at our parents' house for my dad's birthday. She walked in carrying a bakery box and the promise of efficiency. She sat next to Ryan and took his hand under the table, like if she gripped hard enough he'd stop sliding. I liked her immediately, and also felt tired for her. Over the next year, it became a pattern. I'd be sanding a banister, or ordering mulch for a client, or paying a bill, and my phone would buzz with a text from my mom. "Have you talked to Ryan?" Or from my dad, "Can you help your brother with something?" It wasn't always money. Sometimes it was logistics. Sometimes it was rides. Sometimes it was the emotional equivalent of asking me to hold my breath while he figured something out. I did what I'd always done. I found the missing screws. I sent him job links. I paid for a tow one night when Lauren called me crying on the shoulder of I-84. If you are listening to this and thinking that I should have said no sooner, you are right. If you are listening to this and remembering the way your body remembers a role before your brain does, you're right too. That night changed everything. It was a Sunday, early evening, weather clear. My mom texted me around noon. Family dinner at 6. Your dad wants to talk about the holidays. She added a string of emojis she thinks soften messages, but make them look like ad copy. I almost said I couldn't. I'd been up late finishing a punch list and wanted to do nothing. But I went. Habit is stubborn. Their dining room looked like a real estate brochure. Good light, polished table, a bowl of apples dusted with the idea of autumn. My dad poured Pinot. My mom adjusted the runner. Ryan was already sitting down, cracking his knuckles, his knee bouncing. Lauren was next to him, eyes scanning the room. We did the usual. The work updates, the comments about traffic, the part where my mom asked if I was still doing the house thing, as if I might show up one day and admit I'd traded it for a boat. We were halfway through roasted chicken when my dad cleared his throat. For a second, all the conversations dropped away like someone had paused the audio. He tapped his glass gently. "All right," he said. "Let's get to the point." My fork slipped from my hand before his words fully landed. "You'll sign the house over, won't you?" The chuckles around the table were not real. They were the kind of laughs people use to stitch a trap shut. The chandelier above us hummed faintly. Lauren's gaze flicked to me. "No," I said. The room held its breath. My mother's pearls clicked as she turned her head. My father's jaw moved like he was chewing a memory. Ryan looked at my dad, and then at the table, like the grain could offer a cue. My dad smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "It's not forever," he said. "Temporary. Ryan needs a place. He's about to close a really good deal, and it would help him to have some equity to show. You can sign it over to him for a year. We'll take care of the taxes. It's family." I set my glass down carefully. "No," I said again. "The deed is in my name. The mortgage is in my name. I pay every bill. No." Ryan laughed. "Come on, Nat," he said. using the old tone like we were kids again, and he was pushing me on a swing he'd let go of too early. "Don't be dramatic. It's just paperwork." Lauren tilted her head, lips tight. "It would stabilize things," she said softly. "Just short term. We're trying to secure a loan for a small studio. He needs to do what everyone else does," I said. "Earn it." My mother's voice went sugary sharp. "You know what we've done for you," she said. "We raised you. We've helped you when you needed help. It's time to be part of something bigger than your stubbornness." I stared at the grain of the table. It was dark oak with a split like a river. I followed it with my eyes, then looked up. My answer is no. There was a pause that felt like weather gathering. My dad's smile went away. "Then," he said, voice flat, "we'll take this another way." I didn't ask what that meant. It was a threat dressed in a neutral suit. I gathered my bag, stood up, and felt the room tighten around me like a shirt one size too small. Lauren's hand slipped from Ryan's. I said goodnight to my mother the way you do when you're leaving a movie you didn't enjoy but paid for anyway. I walked to my car with my keys already in my hand. I didn't know it then, but that moment would define everything that followed. The next day at 9:13 a.m., I got a call from a number I recognized but never saved, my father's office line. He never called me from it unless he wanted me to hear his title in the background. "We'll be sending over some documents," he said. "A transfer agreement. Our lawyer drafted it. You'll have a week." "I won't sign," I said. "You will," he said, and hung up. 2 hours later, a courier delivered a thick envelope on cheap legal paper with expensive letterhead. It said phrases like, "in consideration," and "temporary transfer of beneficial ownership," and it named Ryan as a co-grantee with rights that were not temporary at all if you've ever read fine print. There was also a letter, separately stapled, saying that failure to cooperate would result in a family trust review and reconsideration of prior support. It was an attempt to sound like estate planning. It read like a warning. I went into my kitchen and set the envelope on the counter next to the notepad with window measurements. I stood there quietly for a full minute and watched the way the afternoon light got trapped in the air above my sink. Then I pulled my laptop toward me. I had met Maya Chen through Leah a year earlier, when Leah's landlord tried to keep her security deposit because of a stain that existed before she ever moved in. Maya was the kind of attorney who didn't waste words. She wore her hair in a low bun and always had a pen behind her ear. When she'd helped Leah, she'd said please and thank you with the kind of calm that made opposing counsel over-explain themselves. I'd liked her instantly, even though we'd only talked for 15 minutes about mildew photographs and move-in checklists. I emailed her with the subject line, "Uncomfortable family situation, property question." She responded 12 minutes later, "Come in at 4:30, bring everything." Her office was on the second floor of a brick building near a bakery that smelled like patience. The reception furniture had clean lines and there was a plant I couldn't name in the corner. Maya opened her door before I sat down. "Natalie," she said, as if we were starting a meeting, not a rescue. I liked her even more. I told her the story. I tried to keep it to the facts. When I said the words transfer agreement, she held out her hand. I put the envelope on her desk. She pulled out the stapled packet, scanned the first page, then the second. Her eyebrows rose the way a teacher's do when they want to hand a pop quiz back with a red circle. She started to laugh. It wasn't cruel. It was clean. A soft exhale, then an actual laugh, the kind people do when they come upon something so badly done they need to recalibrate. "They wrote this themselves," she said, tapping a paragraph. "Or had a friend who dabbles in templates. This is not enforceable. Not as written. It's a mess. It gives away rights they pretend it doesn't. It attempts to pressure you with the idea of a family trust. Do you know of such a trust?" "No," I said. "There's no trust. There's an IRA my dad mentions like a morality tale. That's it." Maya nodded. "Then it's an empty box with a scary label. We'll reply properly." She slid the papers back into the folder and looked at me like a carpenter looks at a wall they know they can fix. "How much documentation do you have of your purchase and renovation?" "All of it," I said. "I save receipts. I have before and after photos, permits, bank transfers. I'm organized," Maya smiled. "Good. Then we'll build with that." She clicked her pen. I'll send a letter advising them to cease contact and direct all communication through me. If they persist, we'll be ready. For the first time since my fork hit that dining room table, I felt the muscles between my shoulder blades ease. It wasn't victory. It was the relief of someone telling you you're not imagining gravity. That night, I went home to my quiet house and pulled out a stack of folders. Purchase paperwork, mortgage statements, utility bills, hardware store receipts with black ink fading to ghost. I labeled everything again in a way that would embarrass me if anyone but Maya saw it. I scrolled through my camera roll and made an album called House Evidence. The earliest photo in it is of the day I pulled up the carpeting in the hallway and found tack strip teeth and dust, ghosting the edges of every step. The most recent at that moment was of the new mailbox post I set perfectly plumb, the concrete base smooth as frosting. Maya's letter went out the next morning. It was 2 pages long, calm and merciless. It cited the law like a string of neat stitches. It used phrases like attempted coercion, lack of consideration, and defamation risk, and asked them to preserve any and all communications related to the property. It gave them a phone number that was not mine. Nothing happened for 3 days. It was a silence with shape. On day 4, I got an email from my mother with the subject line, "Why?" The body said, "We are just trying to help your brother get stable. Family should support each other. This is not the way to treat your parents." It read like a script they'd both written, editing out everything they didn't want to be true. I forwarded it to Maya without comment. Maya replied, "I will respond." That weekend, Ryan showed up at my house unannounced. I was outside, scraping the porch railings, a pile of curling paint flakes at my feet. He swung his car into the curb like it belonged to him, got out with his keys already twirling. He looked tired in a way that makes you want to hand someone a glass of water. He also looked like a kid who'd been told the rules didn't apply if he smiled right. "Hey," he said, planting a foot on the bottom step. "Why are you making this a thing?" "It is a thing," I said. "I didn't lower the scraper. It was just paperwork," he said. "You know, Dad, he's dramatic," he smirked. "It's not like I'm trying to steal your house." "You brought a transfer agreement to Sunday dinner," I said. "You brought a courier to my door. If you're not trying to steal my house, you've chosen a very complicated way to not steal it." He shifted, shoved his hands into his jacket. "It would help me, just for a while." "I know," I said. "And you know what would help me?" "Boundaries," he exhaled hard. "You've always been like this," he said, an old line dressed as fresh insight. "You think you have to do everything alone." "I learned that here," I said, and nodded toward the house. "I learned that at home, too." He looked at the porch railing, at the sander on the step, at the plastic tarp I'd taped neatly along the edge. For a second, something like respect crossed his face, the genuine kind you can't fake. Then it was gone. "Lauren and I are trying to get a place," he said. "I need to show assets. You know how the system is." "I do," I said. "I also know how math is, and how the law is, and how my name works on paper. You don't get to rewrite that." "Dad says you're being cruel," he said too quickly, like he wanted the word out of his mouth and away from him. "Dad says a lot of things," I said. He stared at me a beat longer than I expected, turned, got back into his car, and pulled away. The cherry tree rustled in the breeze, small leaves clapping for nothing. If this were a story with easy turns, that would have been the last time I saw him for months. But life prefers loops. 2 weeks later, a process server came to my door, expression neutral, and handed me a packet with a case caption, Brooks versus Brooks. My parents, as interested parties, and Ryan, as prospective grantee, were petitioning the court for declaratory relief regarding my property. The petition was a cluster of misunderstandings pretending to be arguments, that the property was intended as a family asset, that I had benefited from extensive parental support, that Ryan had contributed to the property's increased value. He had not, and that I was unjustly enriched by something that read like the ghost of a conversation we'd never had. I sat at my dining table and read it twice. The radiator hissed gently. I felt not anger, but a tired clarity. Then I called Maya. Her voice was bright like morning. "They filed?" she said, and I could hear her typing. They filed, I said. Good, she said. Now they've put their cards on the table. We'll respond, and we'll counterclaim for attempted interference with title, and for the funds your father implied were tied to a family trust. You mentioned there was no trust, but I remember Leah saying something about a college account years ago. There had been one. My grandfather had put aside money when we were kids. It had been small but meaningful, the kind of nest egg that makes a first apartment deposit feel less like an earthquake. I had never seen it. When I asked about it in college, my dad said the market had been rough. He said Ryan needed it more. It was a group of sentences I accepted because I was 19 and had already learned which fights weren't mine to win. I'll look, I said. I spent 2 nights going through old emails, old folders, old boxes my mom had labeled with a black marker in a round hand that looks soft until you know better. I found a photocopy of a letter from a bank in Lake Oswego addressed to my parents, referencing 2 custodial accounts established by my grandfather, one for each of us. I found a printout of a statement from my first year of college that showed a balance bigger than anything I'd ever had in my checking account back then. I found nothing with my name on it after sophomore year. I found a photo of Ryan with a used Audi he'd bought that same spring. I found an email from my mom to me about being frugal in college that made me close my eyes for a full, quiet minute. I scanned everything and sent it to Maya. She replied, "This will do." And then there was the work that isn't on TV. The calendar invites, the document requests, the drafting, the redrafting, the small decisions that make the big ones possible. Maya was precise without being cold. She told me what to expect without letting me expect the worst. We had a system, and systems are comfort you can count. Discovery came and went like a careful storm. My parents tried not to respond. Maya reminded them. Ryan's responses were half answers to questions we hadn't asked. My parents' attorney, who was exactly the kind of man you picture when you hear golf foursome, sent a settlement proposal that read like a ransom note with a coupon clipped to it. Maya declined without flair. We kept our heads down. There's a part of every story where you think you're repeating yourself. It's not a flaw. It's how you build pressure. Every day felt like a copy of the day before. I went to work. I came home. I labeled documents. I answered Maya's questions. I fixed something small in the house. The faucet in the bathroom, a draft around the baseboard. The sticking drawer in the kitchen that now slides open with the quiet of a secret you finally decided to stop keeping. When the hearing date came through, it felt both too fast and too late. It was set for a Thursday morning in late March, the kind of day where the gray feels intentional. Maya said we'd be fine. We were asking the court to see what was already true, but she also said we should be ready. People behave strangely when their version of the story is threatened. The night before, I cleaned the house like a person expecting company. It was absurd. No one was coming over. But I wiped down the counters and folded the throw blanket and ran my fingers along the banister I had sanded first when I moved in. I stood in the living room and said out loud, "I've got you." The house didn't answer. It didn't have to. In the hallway, my phone buzzed with a message from Lauren. I hadn't heard from her in weeks. It said, "I'm sorry for what's happening. I didn't know about some of this. Then, if you need me to say what I've seen, I will." I stared at the screen and felt a complicated tenderness. I wrote back, "Thank you. I don't want you in the middle. Take care of yourself," she replied with a heart. It felt like the right size of kindness. The courtroom was small and smelled faintly like old paper and winter coats. The judge was a woman with a calm face who looked like she took long walks. We sat at the table that belonged to us by assignment and by effort. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their attorney, all of them dressed as if the truth had a dress code. Ryan sat behind them. He looked like he hadn't slept well. There was a bandage on his knuckle, which is such a Ryan detail that I almost smiled. Maya did not posture. She stood, introduced me, and then introduced the facts as if they were ordinary guests. Here is the deed. Here are the mortgage statements. Here is the timeline. Here is the letter sent to Ms. Brooks asking her to transfer ownership without consideration. Here are the documents referencing custodial accounts viewed as parental assets instead of funds for the named child. Here is the attempt to claim family asset status without any of the legal structures that would make that a reality. Here is the pattern. When my father's attorney stood, he used the word family so often it lost its shape. He said phrases like cultural expectations, and mutual support. He tried to make it sound like a holiday gathering that had gone sideways because someone forgot the stuffing. The judge let him finish. Then she asked for the paper that proven what he was saying. He did not have it. He had adjectives. The judge ruled the way clean water does, clearly. The petition was denied. There was no basis for any transfer, temporary or otherwise. The court could not create a trust where none existed. The court recommended that my parents and brother reflect on the risks inherent in bringing family disputes into legal arenas. She awarded me fees. She said it all in 5 minutes. We didn't cheer. Courtrooms are not stadiums. Maya nodded once, the kind of nod that professionals give each other when they have done their job. I exhaled. We could have ended there. But life likes echoes. 2 days after the ruling, Maya forwarded me an email from my parents' attorney proposing that we settle the matter privately by agreeing that I would add Ryan to the title for emergency purposes only. It was the same request, dressed in different shoes. Maya called me. "Do you want to respond?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and then paused. "But not the way he wants." We drafted a letter together. It was brief. It said, no. It also said, any further contact intended to pressure or harass will be documented. We'd included an addendum, a request for an accounting of the custodial accounts from our childhoods. Maya had found a leverage point, and she used it with the precision of a carpenter tapping in a shim. A month later, I received a certified envelope with bank statements that confirmed what I already knew. The money had been used for expenses that had nothing to do with me. There were kitchen remodel payments, car payments, a vacation deposit for a rental on the coast. I looked at the numbers, and then I did something I wouldn't have predicted. I closed the folder and walked outside. The cherry tree had begun to blossom, small pink flags, ridiculous and wonderful. I stood beneath it and let 2 petals land in my hair. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a clean sadness that belonged to facts that can't be undone. I gave the documents to Maya. "Do you want to pursue this?" she asked. "We can. It's winnable." I thought about it for 2 days. I thought about my grandfather's careful handwriting on birthday cards and his habit of pressing his lips together when he was thinking. I thought about 19-year-old me buying textbooks with a credit card and calculating interest while eating cereal. I thought about the capacity for people to say, "We did our best," and believe it even when the numbers disagree. I called Maya. "No," I said. "I don't want to chase back the past. I want to secure the present." She understood. "We'll send a final letter," she said. Boundary set. After that, the quiet returned. It wasn't the silence of a storm coming. It was the quiet of a house at 9 p.m., when the dishes are done, and the counters are wiped, and the floor is swept, and the only sound is the refrigerator making a small, faithful hum. It was the quiet of a life you earned. People sometimes ask if I talk to my parents now. The answer is rarely. My mother sends holiday texts that read like the tags on tea bags. My father forwards articles about the housing market without subject lines. I reply politely and briefly. It's not the movie ending people like. It's the real one we've got. Ryan and Lauren broke up in the fall. She moved into an apartment near Laurelhurst with big windows and a rug that makes footprints. She sent me a photo of the rug and a caption that said, "It shows everything and I love it." I wrote back, "Good rugs do. We got coffee once at a place where the milk foam looks like art." She told me she was tired of feeling like a lifeguard for someone who wanted to swim at midnight with rocks in his pockets. I listened. I told her she didn't need to prove she was kind by staying. She cried a little, wiped her eyes, and laughed. "You sound like a lawyer," she said. "I've been hanging around one," I said. We hugged in the parking lot for a second longer than strangers do. As for me, the house keeps accepting what I offer it. In June, I rebuilt the pantry shelves so the flour fits without lying on its side. In August, I finally replaced the last squeaky hinge in the hallway. In September, Leah and I ate chili on my porch steps, while the cherry tree dropped leaves around our ankles like confetti for people who don't want fanfare. In October, I got 3 pumpkins and set them on the steps in a way that made passing kids point. In January, when the air got sharp and the city slowed, I put on wool socks and learned how to fix a stubborn radiator valve because I didn't want to call anyone else to do it. There were moments I didn't expect. One Saturday morning, I found a letter in my mailbox without a return address. It said, "I'm sorry. It wasn't signed, but I knew it was from Ryan. The handwriting was the same as his old birthday cards, a little rushed, a little tilted. I didn't reply because there was nowhere to reply to, and also because apologies without change are like bandages floating on water. It felt less like an olive branch and more like a flare. I folded it carefully and put it in the folder labeled Family, Misc. I'm not a monster. I'm a person who likes records. If you're waiting for the part where my parents show up and say they finally understand me, that's not this story. If you're waiting for the part where Ryan gets a job he loves and we laugh about all this at a barbecue, that might be a different universe. The world we live in is one where people behave like themselves longer than you want them to. It's also one where you get to behave like yourself, on purpose, and then keep doing it even when it surprises people. One evening late this spring, I was sanding the edge of a window sash, the radio low, the air soft. I paused, set the sandpaper down, and looked around my living room. The archway trim still made my chest feel bigger. The floorboards still showed the faint scars I decided to leave because truth looks better than plastic. The notepad in the drawer still said 3534. Outside, the cherry tree moved a little in the breeze. The house felt held. That was the word. Not perfect. Not finished. Held. I thought about the girl I was at 15, straightening the rugs in our living room after everyone else had gone to bed, because messes made my mother anxious. I thought about the woman I was at 25, crying on the hallway floor because a sash cord broke like a promise. I thought about the version of me who sat in Maya's office and heard her laugh at a bad piece of paper, and realized that laughter can be a kind of defense when it's the honest kind. Here's the part I hope you take with you, if you've listened this far. Power isn't always volume. It's not applause, or winning the argument, or changing the minds of people who built their house on a hill they're still trying to rename. Power, when you've grown up being the reliable one, the fixer, the quiet room in a family full of voices, is sometimes a very simple sentence said calmly to people who don't expect you to have it. No. It's the refusal to hand over the keys to something you built because someone else decided your labor was a community project and your name was a suggestion. It's the willingness to be called cruel for taking care of yourself. It's the decision to write things down, to keep receipts, to honor the boring truths that hold your days together. It's occasionally the humor that arrives when someone hands you a flimsy form and tells you it's a contract, and the lawyer sitting across from you laughs kindly and says, "No, it isn't," and you feel your whole spine straighten. People ask if I regret anything. I don't. Not the hours with bleach and vinegar, not the conversations that ended because I let them. Not the court morning where the judge said exactly what the paper already knew. If I regret anything, it's only the time I spent hoping that doing everything right would make people treat me right. That's not how it works. Doing things right makes you trustworthy to yourself. Other people have to meet you there. A few weeks ago, I hosted Leah and 2 coworkers for dinner. We ate pasta with sautéed mushrooms and bread that crackled. We drank something cheerful and not expensive. After they left, I did the dishes slowly, the way you do when a night has been exactly the shape you needed. I dried my hands, turned off the light, and walked through the living room. I touched the archway. I touched the back of the couch. I touched the wall near the door where the paint still feels warmer than the rest. I locked the deadbolt. I slid the chain. I stood there for a second, listening to the sounds of my small street. Someone's, music in the distance, a dog's collar jingling, and felt a contentment I couldn't have described to you 10 years ago. Family should be about love, not control. The part they don't tell you is that love sometimes looks like a person saying, "This is mine, and I'm allowed to keep it." Control sometimes looks like a document with a letterhead asking you to forget what you know. The trick is learning which voice is which, and giving the right one the keys. I'm not my parents' version of a daughter anymore. I'm a person with a house that remembers me. The archway doesn't care who raised me. The floorboards don't care who paid for groceries in 2009. The window sash makes the same polite slide whether or not Ryan calls on holidays. It's not cold. It's honest. If you were here, I'd hand you a mug, and we'd sit on my porch steps, and I'd show you where the cherry tree thinks it owns the fence. I'd point to the corner of the railing where the paint always chips first because the weather hits it head on. I'd tell you how easy it is to think that giving away what you've made will buy you peace, and how I learned that holding on to it bought me something better. I used to measure windows. Now I measure my life in the boundaries I keep and the rooms that feel like mine. I used to accept the story everyone else was writing for me. Now I write down the facts. They're not dramatic. They're the kind that hold. And if anyone asks again, no, I won't sign the house over. I'll sign for deliveries, though. The kind that come in brown boxes with new cabinet pulls and old books that smell like attics. I'll sign for things that make rooms better. I'll sign for things that make hands useful. I'll sign for the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own name, clearly, even when the chandelier hums and someone at the table is trying very hard to tell you who you are. I know who I am. I'm the woman who built a home with the boring bravery of persistence, who hired a lawyer who knew how to laugh at a bad trick, who learned to say no with both feet on the ground. I'm the person who kept the keys not because I was afraid, but because I was finally ready to stay.